All right. Good afternoon, and a warm welcome to all of you here with us in Warsaw and watching us via live stream from around the world. I am Aisha Sasay, and it is my great honor to moderate this important conversation, bringing together leaders and champions to raise urgently needed funds for those directly impacted by the invasion of Ukraine. I'm joined by the co-conveners of today's pledging event, President Ursula von der Leyen and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who is joining us live from Ottawa. We're also joined by President Andrzej Duda. And we have with us Hugh Evans, CEO of the advocacy organisation Global Citizen, which mobilised a worldwide social media rally just yesterday to galvanise support for Ukraine. And later, we'll be hearing from Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who sent us a special message from Kyiv. I also want to mention some special guests, friends from Ukraine, who just very recently were welcomed to Poland. They are from Kyiv, they're from Kharkiv, from Dnipro. They are mothers, they are daughters, grandmothers and sons. They are displaced, but they are not discouraged. And we are here for you today. Now, before we begin our programme, I'd like to invite Your Excellencies, my esteemed colleagues in the press and our guests to please join me in a moment of silence in remembrance for the lives lost since the invasion began and in recognition of all refugees and displaced people around the world. Thank you, everyone. Madam von der Leyen, President of the European Commission, you are the co-convener of today's pledging event. And I'd like to thank you for your leadership and ask you to open the floor first, please.
Yes, thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here with you, Mr. President, with you, Justin. Wonderful to have you here. Indeed, I was yesterday in Kyiv and I visited Bucha. And there are no words for the horror I've seen in Bucha, the ugly face of Putin's army terrorizing people. And I have so much admiration for our brave Ukrainian friends fighting against this. They are fighting our war. It's our fight. That they are in, because it's not only Ukraine fighting for its sovereignty and integrity, but they are also fighting for the question whether humanity will prevail or whether heinous devastation will be the result. It's the question whether democracy will be stronger or it's autocracy that will dominate. It's the question whether there is the right of might dominating or whether it's the rule of law. And therefore, this is the reason why, together with Justin Trudeau, with Hugh Evans, and thank you very much, Mr. President, for hosting it here, we said they stand up for our freedom, so we stand up for Ukraine. This is the reason why we're here today, and we want to rally the world for refugees inside and outside Ukraine, to support them. So I hope that many, many people will join. I want to thank Global Citizens for really activating and mobilizing so many artists, sports people, celebrities. Mr. President, I want to thank you for hosting us, because this is the country that is hosting 2 million refugees from Ukraine. So many people are here who support. Thank you very much for that, and let's have a fantastic result for Ukraine.
Thank you. Thank you, President von der Leyen. Prime Minister Trudeau, we are very grateful to have you with us today and for Canada's support of this effort. Mr. Prime Minister, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Bonjour tout le monde. Thank you for joining the Stand Up for Ukraine pledging event. I'm so pleased to be co-convening this important event. Ursula, we've been intensely working towards this event for a while now, but I need to pause for a moment on your leadership and your commitment to protect those in need, which demonstrates such a strong compassion and a strong presence of humanitarianism. We can always count on you to bring people together, and I want to thank you for all your hard work and for everything you did with your visit to Kyiv yesterday, highlighting just the atrocities, but also so much the human side of this war. I also want to thank President Duda of Poland and Hugh Evans, CEO of Global Citizen, for helping make this possible. We're here today to answer President Zelensky's call for the international community to mobilize in support for Ukrainian refugees and all Ukrainians. Vladimir Putin's war has created a humanitarian crisis. When I was in Warsaw just last month, I met people that had left their homes with only a backpack. It was all they had for their most important belongings. They shared incredibly difficult stories with me. They don't know when they'll return home to their husbands, their sons, their fathers. They don't know what the future holds. À Varsovie, j'ai aussi rencontré des travailleurs de première ligne et des bénévoles qui accueillent les réfugiés. Leur dévouement est remarquable. Mais que ce soit en Pologne ou ailleurs, ils ont besoin de plus de ressources, plus d'aide. Au cours de la prochaine heure, des dirigeants de divers pays et des leaders du secteur privé vont partager les détails de leurs engagements pour aider les réfugiés ukrainiens. Je tiens à remercier tous ceux qui répondent à l'appel du président Zelensky. I also want to thank all the artists, entertainers, athletes, and everyone who participated in the Stand Up for Ukraine social media rally yesterday. If you haven't already, you can still make a contribution by visiting forukraine.com. Your voice, donations, and advocacy are making a real difference. You're helping provide food, water, shelter, and medical aid for refugees who had to flee their homes. So thank you. My friends, as a humanitarian crisis deepens and needs continue to grow, our collective response must keep pace. That's exactly why we're gathered here today. Together, let's keep working to mobilize governments around the world, private companies, and the people in our communities to support refugees from Ukraine and indeed support all Ukrainians.
Thank you. Merci, Prime Minister Trudeau. When the invasion of Ukraine started, her neighbours in the EU and countries like Moldova did not hesitate to offer safe harbour to the masses of people who fled. According to the latest estimate, Poland has taken in more than 2.5 million refugees, offering basic necessities like food, shelter, and medical supplies. President Duda, we thank you for your leadership. We thank you for the generosity of the Polish people. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Madam President von der Leyen, Prime Minister Trudeau, dear Justin, dear friends from Global Citizen, distinguished artists, dear friends from around the world, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for organizing this meaningful event, and dear Madam President, thank you very much for your presence in Kyiv yesterday. It's really important, and that was a visible symbol of the presence of European Union in our neighborhood. Very important for us, for Polish people, and I hope also very important for all European Union, and not only for all European Union countries, but also for all the democratic and just countries around the world. It's symbolic that we are meeting here in Warsaw. Poland has been a frontline country in the face of the Russian war against Ukraine. In so many respects, my compatriots have been the first to help. Thanks to them, Poland is a country where the largest number of Ukrainians have found home. I'm glad that my dear friend, President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, is joining us today. He is an example of a true leader and the hero of our time. This event is another sign of international unity. We all support the same values: peace, freedom, democracy, and the right to self-determination. Today we stand up for Ukraine But at the same time, Ukraine has been standing up for us. Ukrainians are fighting not only for their freedom, but also for ours. Today, we are supporting millions of Ukrainian refugees and people in need. Above all, we are sending a message to every single Ukrainian in the cities and villages under siege. A message of hope to the brave Ukrainian soldiers, heroes defending their country from the aggressor. Dear brothers and sisters, you are not alone. Much has been done. However, in near future, Ukraine will require a huge economic boost, similar to the one offered to Western Europe after World War II, a new Marshall Plan for Ukraine. This is why today's initiative is very much appreciated. I'm glad that the Polish government, with its partners, is planning to follow up and organize an international donors conference for Ukraine. A Polish music icon, Czesław Niemen, sang, and I quote, lecz ludzi dobrej woli jest więcej i mocno wierzę w to, że ten świat nigdy nie zginie dzięki nim. But there are more people of goodwill, and I do strongly believe that this world will never die thanks to them. End of quote. And so it is. So many people of goodwill have been standing up with Ukraine. Today's spectacular event has sent a powerful message in this regard. Once again, many thanks to the organizers. Long live free Ukraine.
Thank you, President Duda. Since February 24th, the eyes of the world have been focused on Ukraine, and we've been horrified by the brutality of the invasion and inspired by the resilience of the Ukrainian people. And as we've seen over the last 24 hours with the Stand Up for Ukraine rally and today's pledging event, the world stands with Ukraine. Let's hear now from President Zelensky.
45 days of a full-scale war and defense against Russia's attack. The attack by the largest country in the world, the largest by its territory, the largest by its aggressiveness, the largest by its impunity. Russian leadership failed to account for one fact, the fact that it attacks the other largest country in the world, Ukraine. The largest by its courage. We're not afraid of massive missile strikes, Russian aircrafts, and never-ending tank columns. Ukrainian courage has inflicted heavy losses on the Russian army, which has already lost more of its soldiers than during the previous decades of regular wars. Ukrainian courage has already united the whole democratic world. Millions of people in different countries are witnessing our courage. The people from different countries know about our bravery. It shall always be remembered in history. But I would like Ukrainian courage to be shared by everyone in the world, just as we are defending ourselves against the greatest tyranny of all. So the other people of the world should bravely resist this tyranny. They have to do everything to force Russia to seek peace. They have to do everything to hold Russian soldiers and their commanders accountable for their crimes against the Ukrainian people. Sanctions must be imposed against all Russian banks. Russian oil embargo must be imposed. The Russian war crimes machine should be denied its capacity to act. Vital assistance should be provided to Ukraine. We have asked for weapons. We've asked for financial assistance. We have asked for support to Ukrainian migrants, for those 10 million people forced by Russia to flee their homes. The democratic world had the power to help. Ukrainian courage deserves respect. Convince your politicians. Stay with Ukraine. Stay with freedom. Stay with bravery.
Very powerful words there from President Zelensky. Ukrainian courage deserves to be respected. And as we've heard, this is a fight for democracy over autocracy. Yesterday, Global Citizen brought the world together online in a social media rally that reached all parts of the globe. And as we've seen throughout history, when art and activism combines, what emerges is a powerful force. Now, this campaign called on leaders from all sectors to stand up for Ukraine. Hugh, Global Citizen has been campaigning from the very beginning for refugees and those displaced by this invasion in Ukraine. Can you tell us a little bit more about your efforts and some of the highlights of the campaign?
Well, thank you, Aisha, and thank you for moderating today's session. And I also want to acknowledge those incredible words of President Zelensky. I think we can all agree that in facing down this enemy with such courage, President Zelensky does so much more than defend his own homeland. He's defending the very basic tenets of a functional international order. And that's why we must not look away. We must do everything within our power to stand up for the humanitarian issue that is the internally displaced people within Ukraine and those refugees who fled Ukraine. A few weekends ago, I was on the border town of Medica, and I saw a young woman with her children crossing the border, and she struggled to carry the bassinet that was in her arms. And today's summit and today's gathering is all about making sure that that woman, when she gets on that bus, has a safe place to go, with a place to sleep that night where she feels safe, where she has health care, food security, and the hope that her child, when they grow up, will have a great education. That's what today is all about. And so I want to start by thanking President von der Leyen. I want to thank Prime Minister Trudeau for co-convening. Their leadership has been absolutely extraordinary, and I commend you from the bottom of my heart. I also want to thank you, President Duda, our sincere gratitude for hosting us today, and to the generosity of the Polish people, because you've shown such generosity and solidarity with the people of Ukraine. Excellencies, members of the press, and also those who are gathered with us today, I really want to thank everyone for their support of Global Citizens Stand Up for Ukraine campaign. As the world's largest movement of citizens taking action for the eradication of extreme poverty, we have been working on this since the beginning. Firstly, to mobilize government and the private sector to increase their financial support for the refugees and internally displaced people. But secondly, we partnered with President Zelensky on a daily call to action that has now been viewed by over 1 billion people around the world just in the last few weeks. Yesterday, thanks to the incredible support of artists, athletes, creators, and all of those around the world, the Stand Up for Ukraine social rally called on world leaders today to pledge the billions of dollars necessary to support refugees and internally displaced people. The videos were shared by incredible people such as Oprah, Elton John, Billie Eilish, Annie Lennox, U2, Celine Dion, Pearl Jam, Bon Jovi, Bruce Springsteen, Hugh Jackman, Priyanka Chopra Jonas, Madonna, and so many more. And in total, yesterday, there were over 3 billion impressions of this campaign. But it's important to realize that this is just the beginning. Our work is just getting started, and we have to view this as a marathon, not as a sprint. So today we look forward to seeing the amazing responses from world leaders and from the business community. And I want to share with you now a brief overview video of yesterday's campaign. Thank you.
I'm Oprah Winfrey, and I'm joining Global Citizen to say a deep and heartfelt thank you to all the countless advocates and allies who have volunteered, who donated, who've spoken out, who risked their lives to stand up for Ukraine.
The refugee situation here is bad. A lot of people still need help.
It's one of the fastest large-scale displacements of children since World War II.
Standing at the Ukrainian border in Medica, standing up for Ukraine.
Leaders around the world, I'm standing up for Ukraine.
So many people in the UK are incredibly keen to help in any way they can, but it's up to the government to do more.
Those people who are leaving their homes and their loved ones need more help.
We urgently ask, plead with our governments to commit big money.
World leaders, we need you to answer the call.
From the activists and advocates working to support refugees.
Contribute the billions they need. Join me and the WWE Universe and stand up for Ukraine.
I'm Casey Musgraves and I stand with Ukraine and refugees around the world.
Slava Ukraine, Slava Ukraine, Slava Ukraine.
Stars and activists coming together to create a powerful force for Ukraine. President Duda is unable to stay with us for the entire event, but we want to thank him for his presence today. Mr. President, we will allow you to leave. We know you have a very busy day ahead. Thank you. Thank you so much for your presence today. Climate justice and political activist. Originally from Kyiv, she recently fled to Warsaw. Irina, thank you. Thank you for taking time out of your day to share your story with us. Can you tell us what the last couple of weeks have been like for you and your loved ones?
So basically, I'm Irina Belay. I'm 16 years old. I'm based in Kyiv, but right now I live in Warsaw. I fled my country and I fled my city due to war, initiated by Putin, but still fueled, by whom? But by some of those who are sitting right now with me at the same table, and with those who are also hearing me right now and watching me right now. The war didn't start at 24th February, and you have to understand it. The war started 8 years ago, and Russia invaded Ukraine 8 years ago. And all these 8 years, the world was completely fine with fueling this war, with having business with Russia, with this cruel regime, with bloody regime. And for me, as a Ukrainian, and for other Ukrainians, it was not a surprise that the war hit. We were preparing in some way for it. And because we know that the world now is based on a system which makes people lower than profit, and money goes over. That's why this business was going on. And the system now is empowering autocracies. That's why we knew that the war will hit.
So, Irina, help us understand how important it is to get these pledges now and the difference that will make.
You know that I'm a climate justice and political activist for 3 years, and I started my way when I was 13 years old, because I saw this world is literally burning, and we are all okay with it. We are all ignoring it. we are all doing or just ignoring or doing some fake actions, and we're not trying to uproot this system. We're only trying to solve the consequences, and we're here now also about it.
Well, Irina, we thank you for capturing the passion and summing it up as, you know, as this war impacts you and your loved ones and so many there in Ukraine. President von der Leyen, to turn to you. Europe has come together in an unprecedented way to support those coming from Ukraine to the bloc. You've activated the protection mechanism and offered direct support to Ukraine itself. Can you tell us a little bit more about those efforts to date, you know, as you stand in solidarity with Ukraine?
Yes, indeed. I mean, there are 4 million people that fled Ukraine right now in the European Union, and there are 6.5 million people within Ukraine who fled the war, and they need help. They need help. They need urgently help. Here in the European Union, it means that we've immediately triggered the protection for them that gives them citizens' rights. So from day one on, access to schools, to housing, to health care, and of course to the labor market. But of course they need much, much more. They need support. The member states are doing an outstanding job. It's phenomenal. The NGOs are working on the ground. The communities, the local communities are outstanding in receiving the refugees. But as I said, more is needed, and any pledge will help a refugee here in the European Union, but also, and this is so important, any pledge will help a person that is internally displaced, so lost their home because of the bombing and shelling of Putin's army within Ukraine. Yesterday, when I spoke with President Zelensky, he urged me again to, first of all, ask for pledges for Ukraine refugees in Ukraine, but also to be very clear for those who had to flee Ukraine that they are welcome here. It's wonderful to have them here, and we want to give them shelter and support and help as much as possible. But President Zelensky was also hoping that pretty soon you might be able to come back and help rebuild the country. What I want to say is that Europe stands by your side, and I know Justin Trudeau, I've spoken with him many times about it. Justin Trudeau, fully determined also with Canada. We stand by your side, be it now in the times of war, be it with the refugees, but most importantly, after this war has been won by Ukraine, for the time for reconstruction and rebuilding the country. So our motto is really Slava Ukraini.
Thank you, Madam President. Prime Minister Trudeau, turning to you now, this crisis has once again shone a light on the unimaginable circumstances that women and girls find themselves in times of conflict. And this conflict is really, again, reminding us of the unique challenges that women and girls face in these moments: separation from their families, gender-based violence as a weapon of war. All of these things come into play. So let me ask you this. In your view, what interventions do we need right now to deal with this issue in the context of Ukraine, but more broadly, how do we tackle this issue of gender equities?
Thank you so much. I mean, first and foremost, one of the things we've seen in so many different contexts over the past years, whether it's the climate crisis that I thank Irina for bringing up, whether it's the COVID crisis, or whether it's Vladimir Putin's illegal war in Ukraine, women and girls and the vulnerable get hit disproportionately hard, but are also a disproportionate level of the solution we need to bring forward. We need to make sure that looking at the horrors that are coming out of Bucha, the use not just of violence against civilians, but of sexual violence specifically against women as a way of trying to crush the Ukrainian spirit, the Ukrainian identity. We need to stand incredibly strong to make sure we're protecting women and girls in this. That's why Canada, not just in regards to Ukraine, but all around the world, has a feminist international assistance policy that recognizes that protecting women and girls is one of the best ways to support not just getting through a crisis, but also rebuild afterwards. That's where we need to lean in on preparing for the future. And just to highlight, Ursula has spoken so strongly, and we've seen Andrzej Duda and others talk about how welcoming and how important it is for Europeans to be standing up and supporting the millions of refugees in Europe. But I've spoken with leaders from around the world who recognize that this crisis is having impacts around the world, either directly on humanitarian sides, but also in standing up for the rules-based order, the principles, the UN Charter, sovereignty of countries. This is a time for all of us to be standing together and doing the right things, and that is why I'm so glad to be representing the world as we co-convene this conference with Ursula.
Mr. Prime Minister, thank you. Thank you for that important context there. Hugh, following on from what Prime Minister Trudeau was just saying about gender inequity, we've also seen in this conflict in Ukraine racial inequity come to the fore. In the early days of this crisis, as millions fled, thousands of international students also left Ukraine. Among them were thousands of Africans and Indians who were in Ukraine studying. And we all read and saw the images of the struggles that they face as they try to get out of that besieged country. What are your thoughts on what needs to be done to ensure that in these moments of crisis, governments don't pit the marginalized and the vulnerable against each other at a time when really collective humanity should take precedence?
Well, thank you for your question, Aisha. I think that, firstly, we saw early on in this conflict a scandalous double standard in the way that some refugees from other races, backgrounds, creed or colour were treated. And I think that rightly so, people were justifiably outraged at that. It shouldn't have happened. And we know that the refugee experience is universal. Thankfully, as President von der Leyen outlined, the EU has said that refugees fleeing from Ukraine can live, work and study across the EU bloc. And I think that Irina in her comments was touching on something really important. I started my activism journey when I was 14 years old in the Philippines, and I lived in India for a year when I was 15. And I saw in India that we need to address these issues systemically, not just as a result of charitable gestures. And so the rules that we're seeing apply here need to become the rule, not the exception to the rule for other refugee crises around the world. What we need to see is that moving forward, this becomes the standards for all of those who are fleeing war due to, say, violence or persecution or climate change, as you highlighted, irrespective of race, religion, creed or colour. And this worldwide refugee crisis from Yemen to Afghanistan is grossly underfunded. If you consider that in Yemen, they've received just $1 billion of the total $4 billion package requested, or in South Sudan, less than 10% of the total $1.2 billion needed. Now, what does this underfunding mean? It ultimately means that kids don't get access to school. There is chronic malnutrition that persists. And so we have to ultimately hold world leaders accountable to make sure they live up to their international obligations. I was saddened recently when the UK government decided to slash $5 billion from their foreign aid budget. It's not necessary. You know, we know that at the same time the UK government initiated an enormous bailout for people during COVID. It's time that refugees get that bailout.
Hugh, thank you so much for that. And Irina, I want to say thank you once again for joining us today. And again, our hearts go out to you, your family, and all that your countrymen are facing right now. We stand with you. Thank you.
I'd like also to add something. May I?
Of course. Go ahead.
We have not only found structural decisions to what to deal with, how to deal with consequences, but we also have to see the roots of the system. And now the system is based on fossil fuels, and it's based now on buying them. And you are now fueling this war. Europe is now fueling this war. World is doing it. 35 billion euros since 24th February.
Yeah.
1 billion for Ukraine.
It is definitely a complicated
Stand for
and
Ukraine with real elections.
And we are here today to stand for Ukraine. And Irina, we thank you. We thank you so much.
The system of fossil fuels.
Now, as we know, today is a pledging event, and thanks to the efforts of our co-conveners and the efforts of Global Citizen, which amplified the call to stand for Ukraine, we have seen global leaders stand up to show their support. Take a look now at some of their messages of support and financial commitments.
As impossible as it might seem, war has returned to Europe. We witness terror, death and destruction. We hear and see increasing reports of unspeakable war crimes against civilians. 4 million people are fleeing while they can in speed unknown in previous crises. We need the world to stand united to stop the war and help Ukraine face a terrible humanitarian emergency.
I am very proud that the European Union responded to the Russian aggression quickly and united. Today we are pledging an additional almost 1 million euros through the International Committee of the Red Cross and World Food Programme, and also as an in-kind assistance for Ukrainian refugees in Moldova, Slovakia and Poland. We stand in solidarity with Ukraine.
Luxembourg stands up for Ukraine too. My government is fully committed to helping those fleeing the horrors of the war in Ukraine, be they in or outside of Ukraine. So far, we have been able to help over 4,000 people that have fled the war in Ukraine to find temporary and safe home in Luxembourg.
As Belgian government, we have decided to budget 800 million euro to be able to support Ukraine and Ukrainian refugees, going from temporary shelter in Belgium to humanitarian aid in Ukraine and its neighboring countries. At this very moment, Belgian trucks are on the road to Ukraine with medical assistance and food. We will continue our efforts as long as needed. Belgium will not leave anyone behind.
These are times for solidarity, courage, and kindness. We all hope for peace, but until then, we stand up for Ukraine.
Rozhodli jsme se nyní uvolnit další pomoc ve výši 200 milionů eur. Bude mířit k lidem, kteří museli kvůli válce opustit svůj domov. Budeme nadále pomáhat také přímo Ukrajině.
You have our full solidarity. Therefore, Germany has pledged an additional 425 million euro in humanitarian and development assistance for Ukraine and its neighbors, plus 70 million euro for medical supplies through the European Civil Protection Mechanism. Germany stands with Ukraine and side by side with all of you.
Croatia pledges another 100 million euros in assisting Ukrainian refugees that we shall be receiving in our country. In these dire times for the Ukrainian people, we will continue our support, our solidarity, and our help in these moments when we are standing by Ukraine and the Ukrainians.
По многобройни начини нацията ни изказа своята съпричастност към народа на Украйна. Бяха организирани редица концерти, изложби, мирни шествия и демонстрации. Ето защо имаме пълната увереност, че сме готови да посрещнем и да се погрижим за още хора в беда.
The international community and the EU, including Malta, have welcomed refugees fleeing from Ukraine with open arms and supported the basic needs of those suffering from the consequences of war. But we know that much more can be done.
Sweden will support Ukrainian refugees arrived in Sweden with 300 million euros. I am glad and proud to be part of the campaign Stand Up for Ukraine. Slava Ukraini.
Today, we commit to providing an additional 1 billion euros in loans to our member states to support the longer-term needs of refugees and their host communities. We are proud to be part of the Stand Up for Ukraine campaign and join forces with others to stand up against this war and to contribute for peace in Europe.
We stand ready to do more, in solidarity with our Ukrainian friends, whose invincible courage in adversity inspires us all.
As millions of Ukrainians flee their homes, seeking safety, we cannot be paralyzed by horror. We must live up to the exemplary bravery and resilience of the Ukrainian people. Our plan is to make available by end of 2023 an additional €4 billion of financing. We will work on this together with trusted partners and friends in Poland and other EU member states to cushion the impact of this unprecedented humanitarian crisis.
I thank the organizers of the Stand Up for Ukraine campaign. Iceland is ready to do more, and the people of Iceland stand with the people of Ukraine.
The courage of Ukrainians is inspiring the world. We stand with them in this struggle, in their struggle for freedom.
Por eso nos sumamos a los esfuerzos de paz y también para la ayuda humanitaria, porque tenemos que apoyar a las víctimas de esta absurda guerra. Y repito, hacer todo lo posible por detenerla de inmediato para que el pueblo deje de sufrir. Un abrazo fraterno desde México.
To all those fleeing the violence, you are not alone. Around the world, we feel a strong sense of responsibility to help. The United States remains committed to doing our part.
Well, I, for one, am so grateful to see so many pledges, so many substantive pledges, for humanitarian and development assistance to Ukraine. It is now my great pleasure to introduce to you Fran Katsoudas, who's with us here in Warsaw, and joining us shortly via satellite from the US will be Carl-Henrik Svanberg. Fran is co-chair of Global Citizens Board of Directors, and she's also Chief People, Policy and Purpose Officer for Cisco. I got it. Okay, PPP. And Carl, when he joins us, I'll do a quick intro. He's representing the European private sector community, so he will join us shortly, and he also heads up the Roundtable for Industry in Europe, and he's the chairman of Volvo. We're working to bring him into the conversation. A warm welcome to you, Fran. President von der Leyen, to turn to you once more. We know that conflict is one of the greatest threats to education, and according to UNICEF, more than 350,000 children in Ukraine have already lost access to education. So, Madam President, my question to you is this: how do we ensure that this doesn't become the last issue that gets funded, and that we don't end up with a generation of displaced youth with a lost education and compromised health?
Yes. Indeed, this is one of the most pressing questions, because many of the refugees are young children and they need immediately access to schools. And of course, children need other children, so be with their peer groups. And therefore, the pledging here is also part of supporting the member states who have refugees and children. I was traveling to Kyiv with the Slovak Prime Minister, and he told me that in the last 4 weeks they got 700 children that need immediately access to kindergarten, for example. So it's just also you need teachers, you need classrooms, very practical thing, very down to earth. And therefore it is so necessary that we support them in that. But also health issues. The normal access to health care is important, but we have, for example, many that come that are not vaccinated, not only against COVID, but also the basic vaccinations that you get normally in your childhood. So this has to be done. Or there are many that come that have other diseases that normally are not so present in the population. So the access to healthcare is eminent, extremely important. All these are topics where the member states are really doing a great job. and doing their utmost to accommodate, but the more support they get, the better. And then there is a last point. I just wanted to refer to Irina's last comment. Irina, you're so right. Irina wanted to tell us, rightly so, that of course we are now speaking about the refugees. But we also have to be very clear towards Putin that this cannot be this aggression. And therefore we are imposing heavy sanctions on Putin and his war machine to really dry out that. Economic sanctions, financial sanctions. And Irina is right. What we have to do is get rid of the fossil fuel dependency from Russia. This is for us so important. So we got out of coal, we are looking into oil, and Irina, what we have to do is not only diversify away from the Russian fossil fuel, but massive investment in renewables. This is not only good for a strategic investment in independence, but it is of course also good for our climate and for our planet. So many tasks to look at, and I just wanted to support you on that point, Irina. It is a very important one.
Well, you can be sure the young will lead the way. We are always grateful for the bravery of the young, and here that's what Global Citizen is all about, activating these young voices to get involved. I want to talk to you about something specific, Hugh. Even before the invasion began, we know that global humanitarian aid budgets were already being strained, that not just humanitarian aid budgets, but development budgets as well were under severe strain after 2 years of the COVID-19 pandemic. I've got to ask you, again, considering this is one of the core drivers of Global Citizen's work, how will this invasion impact efforts to reduce poverty and hunger, and what must governments do?
Thank you, Aisha. So I think, firstly, it's important to acknowledge that during the pandemic alone, 120 million people were pushed into extreme poverty as a result of COVID-19, even before this invasion occurred. And we know that hunger has been on the rise in the last 4 years. We know that climate change continues to be one of this generation's greatest challenges, I believe, alongside the challenge of ending extreme poverty. And we also know that right now in Ethiopia, they're suffering from one of the worst climate-induced droughts in decades. This was all before the invasion, and the invasion is going to exacerbate these currently existing challenges. At the same time, because governments are facing so many competing pressures, as we're talking about, pressure to invest in this or this, I think the question we have to grapple with is this is really not a question of wallet, it's a question of will. Because we've seen how governments can rally in times of crisis. We saw it during the pandemic where trillions of dollars were invested when it was necessary. And I would argue right now it's absolutely necessary to invest into the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, because we're then investing in the future of women and girls, we're investing in the future of our planet, and we're investing in everyone's shared prosperity. And that's why I'm really proud to work alongside Prime Minister Trudeau and President Ursula von der Leyen, because I think these are world leaders who exemplify big tent foreign policy rather than zero-sum thinking. I think we need to encourage leaders that really encourage a big tent philosophy, not a zero-sum game where one person's benefit is another person's loss. This is a world where we have adequate resources. We need to allocate those resources accordingly. And so I believe now is the time to double down, and as we head towards really ongoing efforts to mobilize global citizens around the world, this intersection between democracy and the eradication of extreme poverty has been stronger now more than ever. We need to really uphold and support world leaders who invest in the future of our planet.
Hugh, thank you so much for that. Thank you. As you said, it's not about wallet, it's about will, and I want everyone to remember that, and there's more than enough money to do this work. Prime Minister Trudeau, if I could bring you in here, the immediacy of the social media-driven news cycle is driving the way we're consuming news. We've all seen the heartbreaking images of hospitals being targeted in Ukraine, and we've read the many stories of medical supply lines being blocked. We know that the sudden and the significant flow of refugees has put strain on healthcare systems. So I want to spend a moment and focus on that and get your thoughts on how conflict impacts healthcare systems and what must international governments do.
Thank you very much. First of all, one of the things that we've seen over the past years, whether it was the COVID crisis or whether it's this war in Ukraine, everything's interconnected around the world. None of us are fully isolated from impacts of what's going on elsewhere. That's why I thank Hugh for bringing up the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals from the UN. I'm actually co-leading with Mia Motley of Barbados a push to really make sure that countries are buying in fully on this with not just the money but the will, as Hugh mentions. But we need to respect and understand that the focus that Putin has had on impacting civilian infrastructure, whether it's the train station we saw recently, whether it's civilians in Bucha, or whether it's maternity wards or hospitals, there is a deliberate attempt to cause as much long-term damage as possible to the Ukrainian people. And that is where the world does need to continue to stand up. Obviously, we need to be there to help heal the war wounds right now. But we also know there will be young people, as Ursula talked about, impacted for decades by the violence, by the horrors of war. We need to make sure we're there to build resilience, there to deal with the mental health consequences as well of the trauma, of the loss, of the grief, of the fear that has been brought in, that stability that the world has started to take for granted in many places is now highlighted that it's not automatic. And we need to continue to be there for each other, even as we stand up for each other and stand for Ukraine.
Mr. Prime Minister, thank you. Thank you. I want to shift gears now and talk about the private sector, which has a big role to play in moments of crisis like this one. Fran, if I could bring you in here, I want us to talk big picture and really talk to me about how the expectations of the private sector have changed among employees, customers and society at large over the last couple of years.
Thank you, Aisha. I think this is so important. So the first thing that I would say is the issues that we're dealing with are so complex that they require the private sector to really support and to partner with NGOs and governments. I think one of the learnings that we had throughout COVID was that companies found their way to really focus on their employees, their well-being, their health, their mental health. And this was a really important step for us. And I think the big question now for companies is that same focus and accountability that we have to our people, can we get there where we feel that accountability to communities around the world? And I think the most amazing thing is that for many companies, the answer is yes. And you see them showing up and supporting, and we see that here in Poland and Ukraine, which is beautiful. But there's a call to action for all of us to learn what it means to be a corporate citizen. And when we are a corporate citizen, I think what that means is that we're focused on the digital divide. We're focused on issues like education and how we can play a role, and especially now having 4 million displaced people that really need our help. We have to focus on social justice and equality for all. We have to focus on the environment. We have to focus on the systems, how we build to a regenerative planet. And I think that's really the opportunity. And for those in the private sector that have stepped up, and there's so many, I think we want to say a huge thank you to you. And we need to acknowledge that there's so much work to be done, and that together from a corporation perspective, we stand for Ukraine.
Thank you for that,
Fran.
Thank you. And I'm pleased to say we have Carl Henrik with us, joining us from the US. Thank you so much for being with us. Can you give us your sense of how the European private sector is stepping up in this moment?
Thanks, very nice to invite here. Please. What's happening now in Ukraine is, of course, touches people. Who would have thought once again we would see a war? President Zelensky's words were moving. Maybe he's the biggest leader of our time. He the Ukrainians. They're fighting for their food. They're fighting for their country. They're standing up for our work.
Karl-Henrik, apologies. We're having some tech issues with you, so we're going to interrupt, and apologies to all of you watching and here in the room. The tech gremlins got him. Apologies. So we're going to move on because, you know, building on what Fran said and what Carl was building up to is that the private sector is stepping up. Take a look.
Google.org and Google employees have so far provided more than $35 million in cash and in-kind donations for humanitarian relief and refugee support. We're also providing the International Rescue Committee with grants and a team of 11 Google engineers working full-time, pro bono, to provide vital information for refugees like accommodation, documentation, and more. The tool is already available at unitedforukraine.org, and there's more to come. We deeply appreciate your partnership and your leadership in this epic work.
On behalf of CSL, we commit 1.6 million euros to stand up for Ukraine.
Sanofi is proud of its response to the urgent need for vaccines. In a record time, we have donated close to 300,000 vaccines for Ukraine as well as 3 neighboring countries.
In addition, through our Sanofi Foundation, we have been able to donate essential medicines, which added to our vaccines donation can now amount to 22 million patients in Ukraine and neighboring countries. We've also been proud to contribute with cash donations amounting to 5 million euros, and we are now continue to stand up for Ukraine to play our part with all the partners.
We are sending electrical equipment to Ukraine in collaboration with the European Union, and our employees have donated tons of humanitarian supplies, and we have several homes available for those we come to Spain. And I can announce today a further donation of 1 million euros to international organizations. Iberdrola is and will remain committed to help.
As you see, there are a whole host of private sector companies stepping up, Coca-Cola, Verizon, Delta, all making significant pledges. Thanks to them and also to Fran and Karl-Henrik for sharing their perspective. Thank you. All right, shifting gears once more. About a month before the invasion started, Victoria Romanska, who's joining the conversation now, started an open source startup. But like so many other people, the conflict quickly put a stop to her efforts. So Victoria and her team shifted gears and decided to focus on creating one of the first refugee centers here in Warsaw. And today they have 5 locations that are operating here in Warsaw and in nearby Razem, if I'm right. And we actually had a chance to visit one of the locations earlier this morning, and they are doing truly incredible work. More than €500,000 have been raised for refugees thanks to the effort of Team Ukraine Love. Victoria, thank you for the work you do. Thank you for being here with us. The whole world is watching, the whole world is listening. So let me ask you this. What do you want everyone to know about the people you're helping here in Poland?
First of all, thank you very much for coming. And I would like you to look around. You're today in a room with strong, smart, incredible women who had to get away from war, who had to be dislocated and be present and carry this niche of supporting Ukraine from the outside. Over here, besides the refugee houses, besides the enormous, more than 400 tons of humanitarian aid, which was supported and sent to Ukraine, we are actually supporting as many refugee houses as is possible. We have already started making the schools for Ukrainian children and Polish one in order to bring the equality, as there is no difference between the children. They are all ours. You know, it is very important to highlight that, guys, we are union. And of course, with every single bombing, they are taking away the leftovers of our Soviet past. And with every single child being educated on the territory of European Union, we're becoming more united. And all of those children will come back, will build stronger, better Ukraine on those ruins of our past. You know, I do believe that pledging summit is very important, since amount of work which we are currently doing it's so little. I'm coming every single day, I'm speaking to those women, and I know that there is a lot of work to do. So yes, if we can support by simple donation, by simple story, it's the list what is possible to do today. Thank you for inviting me to speak.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for that, Victoria. President von der Leyen, to turn to you now. Many across the globe are becoming increasingly aware of the wider impacts of this conflict on the global food supply. In fact, there are estimates of up to 500 million people potentially facing food insecurity as a result. So with that in mind, what actions can the EU and the European community take to prioritize this issue and basically prevent or certainly minimize the global food crisis?
Yes, indeed. I mean, besides the incredible human suffering that this war brings along and the unbelievable atrocities that we see, there are knock-on effects, for example, on global food security. Ukraine is basically the wheat chamber of the world. And now it is becoming more and more difficult for the farmers in Ukraine to sow and to have the next harvest. And if you see the figures, how many countries in the global south, for example, are dependent on the export of wheat to their countries from Ukraine, it's a very, very serious problem. And it is even more serious because yesterday the Prime Minister, Denis Shmyhal, told me in Kyiv that Putin's army is now systematically bombing warehouses where grain and wheat is stored. Or, for example, Ukraine needs to export the wheat by ships, usually. So he's blocking these ships in the Black Sea, therefore increasing the pressure on the food system. So the first thing that we've offered is, listen, Ukraine, then take the land route and we will create so-called green corridors, that these transports for wheat can go along through different borders. It's a longer land route, but at least get the wheat out and get some income in without any difficulties through these green lanes. We do everything possible to support the Ukrainian farmers who need everything to sow, that they can do their work. under very difficult circumstances because of their safety. But they are willing to risk their life really to produce the wheat that the world needs. We are giving now 2.5 billion euros into the global food security, but I know more will be needed, because if I look at the numbers, I mean, Ukraine is a major part of the World Food Programme, for example. So this is one of the ugly knock-on effects of this horrible war, and one more reason to do everything to end this war.
Madam President, thank you. It's such an important point she's making. I was listening to the BBC and they were saying the conflict in Ukraine is impacting Egypt because they depend on bread and they're not able to get the wheat, and so prices are going up. So these are the ripple effects. They go right across the world, and that's why we all need to stand for Ukraine and take this seriously. Prime Minister Trudeau, to double down on what Madam President was just saying, the World Food Programme had already warned that 2022 would bring catastrophic hunger. And that I'm also learning, and this I didn't know, that Russia and Ukraine account for 12% of all food calories. So to have these countries now mired in conflict and their importance to the global food supply chain, what do countries need to do? What does the international community need to do to bolster hunger relief efforts, particularly to vulnerable regions?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, this just emphasizes once again what a terrible, horrific mistake Vladimir Putin made in choosing to launch this war. Because not only is it causing horrific impacts on Ukraine, on Europe, but as you say, it's affecting the world. In my conversations in terms of pulling people together for this pledging conference, but also just gathering support for Ukraine through the UN and elsewhere, my conversations with leaders in South America, in Africa, in Asia, across the global South, there is a deep, deep concern that the energy insecurity and specifically the food insecurity that is being compounded, that, as you say, was already there for this year but is going to get so much worse, requires us all to stand up and work together, supporting organizations like UNICEF and particularly the World Food Programme that is heavily dependent on wheat from Ukraine, to try and replace that. And countries like Canada that can continue to grow and grow more will need to do that to compensate. But it's going to be a very, very difficult year. And I think that it underlines how important it is that, yes, we act to support people now in concert, in working together, but also that we understand that global instability, that attacks like this on the sovereignty of another country, conflicts wherever they happen around the world, have an impact that goes far beyond just the people and the civilians in the line of battle. It goes to our entire global system, where we have to stop allowing conflicts and wars to undermine the progress, the support, and the advances we're seeing across the global South and around the world in creating more resilient opportunities for everyone. This is a big step back in the march towards a fairer world for everyone. That's why the world is coming together, not just in this conference, but in support for Ukraine and standing against Russia's terrible, terrible decision.
Mr. Prime Minister, thank you. Hugh, turning to you. Since this invasion began, global citizens' message to world leaders has been pretty clear. Immediately support an emergency food response in Ukraine, assist all refugees that are facing food insecurity, and ensure global food stability. So can you speak a little more about the specific actions that policymakers need to be taking in the coming weeks on these, because there's not just one, on these interrelated issues?
Absolutely, and I think that you've done a really good job at already summating the challenge ahead of us. So I want to focus, if I can, just for a few seconds on three practical solutions. I think the first solution, and Prime Minister Trudeau alluded to this, is that the World Food Programme have an urgent $590 million appeal right now to support the 3.1 million internally displaced people, those affected in Ukraine, who are currently facing food insecurity. So that's the first objective that we all need to rally around. The second thing that we can do is we need to open up food stocks to ensure global food supply consistency and predictability. And this is particularly a message for the United States and China to consider releasing grain stocks to support humanitarian efforts if necessary, because it's the only way we can create the sort of predictability that's necessary to make sure that markets do not fluctuate, because ultimately it's the poor that pay the highest price. And currently, we've seen already a 12% increase in global food prices already. And the third thing we need to do right now is we need to prevent 500 million people from facing food insecurity, particularly across sub-Saharan Africa, by supporting smallhold agricultural farmers to have the inputs they need ahead of the upcoming planting season. Those three policy prescriptions, I believe, will have a significant impact on ultimately ensuring that we can keep this issue under control, while ultimately there is an opportunity for peace to prevail and the war to end.
There's indeed much to be done, Hugh. Thank you. Let's hear more now from global leaders as they continue to pledge their support for Ukraine. Take a look.
We also pledged to direct all REACT European Union funding available to Ireland, amounting to more than €50 million to humanitarian purposes. In addition, with our European Union partners, we will continue to treat Ukrainians as if they were European Union citizens.
We must also look ahead. When the war is over, we should rebuild what was destroyed and make it better for the heroic people of Ukraine.
We will not look the other way. In the last 2 weeks, the government has set aside new funds to help Ukrainian refugees meet their everyday expenses. This means food, medicines, school equipment. Overall, we've allocated roughly €500 million to support Ukrainians arriving in Italy and €110 million in financial assistance to the Ukrainian government.
My country is ready to participate in the Ukraine Solidarity Fund and other future multilateral efforts to help Ukraine. Today, I call on every country of the free world and all their citizens to join forces. We must all act united to stop the war.
We help in kind with truckloads of humanitarian goods and protective equipment. We host an ever-growing community of displaced Ukrainians. So far, 50,000, including particularly vulnerable groups, such as orphans and patients with severe medical needs. But in the end, what the Ukrainian people desperately need and what they deserve is peace.
Is szeretném biztosítani ukrán barátainkat, hogy Magyarországon továbbra is biztonságos menedékre talál mindenki, aki a háború elől menekül.
I would like to announce a fresh and symbolic financial commitment of €100,000 to support the humanitarian work undertaken in Ukraine and neighboring countries by the relevant agencies of the United Nations.
Denmark will continue to do everything we can do to support the people of Ukraine and your fight for freedom and peace. I speak for all of Denmark when I say we stand by you and we believe in Ukraine.
Slovakia commits €530 million to stand up for Ukraine. Slovakia stands in solidarity with Ukraine. And as a loyal neighbor, we want to help both refugees fleeing the war as well as the internally displaced persons in Ukraine.
Those fleeing the war need a vision for their future. We pay special attention to the integration of the refugees. We provide Ukrainian children easy and quick access to schools and education. Like this, we help them integrate our society. These children get skills that they will need in Ukraine in the future when they will be rebuilding Ukraine. This week we made a national budget decision to further allocate €700 million for helping Ukrainian refugees in Finland.
Ukrainians will withstand this tragedy, and
And once the war is over, they will rebuild their beautiful country with our help. We stand with Ukraine.
We admire the resilience and resistance of the Ukrainian people. We are now welcoming Ukrainian refugees to Norway. My government is working hard to make sure they are received and settled in a good, decent and hospitable way. Norway stands up for Ukraine, as we all should.
Millions of people have been displaced either within Ukraine or forced to live as refugees. Alleviating the impact on them is one of our main priorities. Today, we pledge €1 billion of support for these innocent citizens whose lives have been turned upside down.
We commend the immense solidarity shown by Ukraine's neighbors. We stay ready to further support them according to their needs and in close collaboration with the EU.
Estonia has donated over €1 million in direct humanitarian aid, and today I pledge 100,000 more.
ولذلك تعلن دولة قطر انطلاقا من مسؤوليتها الأخلاقية عن تخصيصها مبلغ $5 ملايين أمريكي من خلال صندوق قطر للتنمية للمساعدات الإنسانية لدعم اللاجئين والنازحين الأوكرانيين.
Bahrain was one of the first countries to provide humanitarian help for the refugees in Ukraine through the United Nations organization. And that is our King's strategy to take fast initial action to provide rescue support for the needy people of Ukraine, followed by field visit where we will conduct a live assessment of the situation and provide necessary development assistance and support.
Japanは3億ドルの資金協力、物資提供、人的貢献、避難民の受け入れを行います。
The call has gone out to the world to stand for Ukraine, and many of our leaders are answering, and we are grateful for that. As we begin to conclude our program today, Hugh, let me bring you in here in this moment to share some of your takeaways from what you've seen and heard over this past hour, and your thoughts on what needs to happen next.
Let me start by saying a huge thank you to our co-conveners, President von der Leyen and Prime Minister Trudeau, for your leadership. We wouldn't be here today without your extraordinary ability to reach out to the world and bring everyone together. So I think they deserve a round of applause. Thank you. I'd also like to thank President Duda and the Polish people for their warm hospitality in hosting us, as well as also acknowledge President Zelensky for his inspiring words earlier. And thank you to you, Aisha, for being such an extraordinary moderator. You are amazing.
Thank you. Thank
and
you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'd like to leave us with just one clear takeaway, and that is that this is just the beginning of the process, not the end. I think that once things leave the headlines, often politically, it can be harder and harder to fight for those issues. Our job as citizens around the world is to keep the issues that matter in the headlines and to ultimately drive a movement of citizens committed to those issues. So my ask of all of you who are here today, because we are all ultimately just family, friends, children, sons, daughters, brothers and sisters, is I'd encourage everyone, if you can, make a donation to support the people of Ukraine. I think Victoria said it so well, that this is an urgent thing where everyone can do something. If you can't afford to make a donation, please use your resources or your company's resources. Encourage your private sector leaders to step up, and ultimately all of us have a voice. So use your voice to keep this issue of the urgent humanitarian crisis facing the people of Ukraine and for refugees all around the world front and center, because ultimately these are the values of global citizen that ultimately we stand for, and I hope all of you will stand for in your own lives. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Prime Minister Trudeau, thank you again for your leadership, for the support of the Canadian people, and for being with us today from Ottawa. We truly do appreciate you. The floor is yours for your final remarks.
Thank you, Aisha. Thank you all. To everyone who's contributed to the Stand Up for Ukraine event. You're making a real difference. Your efforts are saving lives. And of course, Canada will continue doing its part as well. Like the other countries making announcements, I can announce a new $100 million contribution, bringing our total humanitarian assistance to $245 million since the start of the year. We'll also provide over 345,000 essential relief items like blankets and mattresses to help those who need it the most. This is in addition to the $620 million in financial assistance we've already provided to Ukraine, with another $1 billion in support still to come for Ukraine's economic resilience. Canada is home to the second largest Ukrainian community in the world after Russia. I'm talking to you today from the Canadian Museum of History. You'll have seen behind me a church. Well, it's St. Onofrius' church, which is a consecrated Ukrainian Catholic church that was built more than 100 years ago in the Canadian prairies by some of those early Ukrainian settlers who came to Canada. It's a reminder that Canadians and Ukrainians share strong historical ties with so many countries around the world. Le Canada est toujours prêt à accueillir des réfugiés et des nouveaux arrivants de partout dans le monde. En mars, on a investi 117 millions de dollars pour mettre en place des mesures d'immigration spéciales pour les gens fuyant la guerre en Ukraine. On a élargi le soutien et les services pour les aider à s'établir à leur arrivée. On a aussi mis en place une voie vers la résidence permanente temporaire pour permettre aux Ukrainiens de travailler, d'étudier et de demeurer au Canada. En moins d'un mois, on a approuvé plus de 30 000 demandes et aujourd'hui, on continue d'en faire plus pour aider. We're continuing to look at ways to support Ukrainians who want to come to Canada and need financial help to make it happen. We're leveraging relationships with commercial airlines to organize a number of targeted charter flights in the coming weeks, and we'll provide up to 2 weeks of hotel accommodation for those who need it on arrival. When violence forces people to leave their country rapidly, it's important to make sure they have what they need while they settle into their new communities. That's why we'll set up short-term income support to help Ukrainian refugees get on their feet. We're working with Canadians, provincial governments and partners all over our country to ensure Ukrainians have a warm reception when they arrive. These are efforts that Canada is doing, but countries around the world, particularly in Europe, are stepping up in all these ways as well, because this is a moment where the world needs to come together, stand up for Ukraine and stand up for our values and principles, remembering that everyone deserves to be safe. So let's continue to be there for each other, my friends, and let's all continue to stand up for Ukraine, the values that we all believe in deeply. Merci beaucoup.
Merci, Mr. Prime Minister, and thank you again for the wide-ranging support you continue to provide to Ukraine. President von der Leyen, thank you for everything you and the EC have done to make today happen in support of those impacted by this invasion. I'd like to invite you now to share your final thoughts.
Thank you so much, Aisha. Thank you very much for a splendid moderation. Thank you very much. And many, many thanks to you, Hugh, the global citizens, for again standing up for those who need a strong voice, those who we often do not see, do not hear, and mobilizing, rallying the world and pushing us politicians hard and the leaders hard. That's your job, and it's wonderful to see that. And Justin, many, many thanks for being a fantastic co-host. Wouldn't have been possible without you. And thanks for your determination. Whenever I meet you in our G7 meetings, for example, your intensity of your beliefs and the strength with which you are fighting for the refugees and their needs, I really want to thank you for that. And when I look into this room here, I know there are many refugees here in the room. And looking into your eyes and thinking about your thoughts and the fears you might have, I just want to tell you that we stand by you. I want to thank the citizens, the many, many, many people who just opened their hearts and their minds and their doors and want to help you and comfort you, because they know the question how we act today might one day also be a question where they need help, and then hope to find citizens that open their minds and hearts and doors for them. And therefore, thank you all for stepping up for Ukraine. I'm very curious what the pledges will bring. And you've seen many, many European leaders that have pledged for their country. We always speak of Team Europe. These are the 27 member states and the European Commission. So we'll see what the 27 member states have pledged. But I can only announce today for the European Commission that we want to pledge 1 billion euros. 600 million of those will go to Ukraine, to the Ukrainian authorities, and partially to the United Nations, so that the Ukrainian authorities who know exactly who is in need, can distribute that. And 400 million euros will go to the frontline states that are doing such an outstanding job and helping the refugees that are coming. And the final tally, I think you are the boss.
No, you are the boss. You are the president. I'm definitely not the president.
Am I supposed to? Okay, let me have a look at the figures I see. So, whoa. We have finally, the world has finally pledged 9.1 billion euros through this campaign, and in addition, the Commission working with EBRD adds another billion for the IDPs in Ukraine. This is fantastic. So 10.1 euros, and if you say that in dollars, it's even more.
I just want to say that again, just so that you'll hear one more time. 10.1 billion euros. And I just think that deserves another round of applause, because that is tremendous. So we're all in the room. Thank you. Thank you once more. Excellencies, members of the press, and our friends from Ukraine, I want to say thank you. Thank you for being with us here today. Thank you for your time, for your support. To our friends from Ukraine, I want you to know that we will continue to stand with you. As you said, these moments, they fall from the headlines, but we will continue to stand with you in this moment. To end our pledging event today, we wanted to end with a song. This was a song that was written 50 years ago by John Lennon, but performed in this moment by his son, Julian Lennon. And it's a song that symbolizes light at the end of a tunnel. So please enjoy Julian Lennon and Nuno Bettencourt performing Imagine.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us, above us only sky. Imagine all the people living for today. Imagine there's no countries. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. Imagine all the people living a life in peace. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us, and the world will be as one. Imagine no possessions. I wonder if you can. No need for greed or hunger. A brotherhood of man. Imagine all the people sharing all the world. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us, and the world will live as one.
So beautiful and so powerful. Thank you again to our co-conveners and to Hugh Evans, a global citizen. Thank you to all of you. That concludes today's program. Thank you.